Hello and welcome to this video on the new concept designs for the Castle Car Park and the Eye of York scheme. I'm Katie Peakbout, the Head of Regeneration for City of York Council. I'll be giving a little bit of background on the revised brief and details of how to get involved in the public engagement.
And I'm Matt Costa, Landscape Architect Director for BDP. I'll be running through the concept designs.
The brief for the Castle Car Park and Eye of York area was revised by the Executive in November 2023 to align to the new council priorities set out in the council plan, One City for All, and the themes set out in the Our City Centre vision, while still drawing on the previous engagement principles. The new brief for the scheme requires that 30 blue badge spaces be retained in the scheme, that the scheme focus on creating greener space with a greater focus on informal play, and reducing the upfront capital costs of delivering a scheme and ongoing management costs. This is to ensure that the revised planning application is simpler, more affordable, with a more affordable scheme, reflecting the more inclusive ambitions of the new council plan. The planning application will be an amendment to the existing application, retaining the same red line boundary, including Tower Street in front of the Hilton, all of the Clifford's Tower area, the Eye of York, Castle Car Park, and the boardwalk area to the rear of the Castle Museum. However, it's proposed that the scheme be developed in phases linked to the funding that is available. And the phase one of the delivery of the scheme is shown by the blue line boundary. I'll hand over to Matt now to talk through some of the concept designs.
Thank you, Katie. I suppose the start of the concept design was these three elements that you see here. So there's three key sort of pillars of the design that we'd like to build from, and that's essentially that we are creating a new green space, that it will be a space that's designed for all, and that we tell York's story. So when we talk about creating a new green space, you know, York has a very unique character, and part of that is obviously the historical character and the ability for the space being now a green space to tie in with some of those existing features, such as the historic walls that you have around the city centre that creates a sort of green network around the city. Also importantly, that being a green space with the city centre being so compact and so sort of hard in nature in terms of its pavement, being a green space, I think this will be a place that really gives some respite for those visiting within those busy areas within the streets and within the city. So I think it's a really sort of key feature that now we're going to a green space, that it could really create quite a unique place for people to visit in York. The other aspect is a city that's designed for all, or a scheme that's designed for all. So as Katie mentioned, part of the brief is to re-provide the 30 blue badge spaces that currently exist within the Castle Car Park. We want to go beyond that. We don't want to just say, well, we're doing car parking. We want to make sure that all the features within the site are accessible and inclusive, and so we really want that to underpin everything that we do, from play to seating to parking to access. And then finally, telling York's story. The site is historically significant in terms of where it sits. It is located in the confluence between the River Ouse and the River Foss. And so playing that story with the connection with water and the connection with the river is really important element that we want to pull out as part of that historic storytelling. Next slide, please. So obviously there is the open brief, and the open brief has a number of different elements within it which we're trying to respond to. Now, as we mentioned before, this is now a different space. It's a space that's going to be primarily a green space, so very different to the previous planning application that we had. But we still believe that there's a lot of elements within the site that can respond to the open brief. So creating places for reflection, creating garden spaces, creating new areas of play, creating places to meet, to gather, to parade, to protest, anything that really the site could function as a city historic asset. I think we can really build into this space as a green space. There's also sort of the concept and sort of the diagrams that you see on the left hand side of the slide just reference the fact that actually this is one of the few sites where you get an elevated vantage point. You know, you can access Clifford's Tower and the new viewing platform that's at the top of Clifford's Tower and view down on the space. So actually, when you make bold moves such as referencing the water and the moat within the landscape, it is quite a bold planting design, a landscape feature that can actually be appreciated in its entirety. So that's quite a key thing that we'd like to pull through in terms of the design. The next slide, please. So this is the master plan as we've got it, and we'll go through it in a bit more detail over the next slides. But essentially, you have the Clifford's Tower area and the new green space that has the blue badge parking that you see at the top of the screen. You have the river edge and the boardwalk going down the sort of the right-hand side of the plan where the River Foss is, and that connects into the Castle Mills scheme and the new bridge connection that goes across to Piccadilly. You also have the Eye of York space, so working with the different adjacencies of the court and the museum in that space. So this is the sort of concept plan as we've got it, and obviously you can see the sort of bold move that we're trying to create with the swathe. So the idea that bold landscaping that's sort of signified with the blue hatching within this plan is referenced, and it is something that is going to be a really sort of strong and striking feature within the landscape that tells that historic narrative. So when we go into a bit more detail, I'm sort of running from the top of the plan through to the bottom of the plan. We want to improve the connectivity of the site. So we're looking to improve the pedestrian connections from Castlegate across into the site. We obviously have the blue badge parking that you see just to the north, which sort of sits around the existing turning head of the service yard that you sort of see highlighted in grey there. We want to create a new connection. We're calling this the Castle approach. So this is going to be a direct connection that links through the space towards the Eye of York area. And either side of that, you obviously have Clifford's Tower and the new sort of planting scheme that's going to sit as part of that. And then on the other side, you have the sort of open lawn space where we're looking to integrate elements of play, also elements of sort of suds and water, sort of water style planting to reference the idea of the river style landscape coming into the design. You also have the new boardwalk, which runs down the Foss, and we'll go through that in a bit more detail later on. And then the sort of Eye of York space, so how that works with the complexities of the court and the museum having very different uses, and how the landscape reacts to those different uses whilst creating a sort of garden space. So I think I mentioned before, this is the concept designs. We're still at very early stages, so we are we've still got a long journey before we go towards planning. And part of that is that the designs that you're seeing at the moment, whilst there are our initial concepts, they are still to be developed. And one of the things that we want to develop is actually how we configure the car parking. So the two sort of variations that you see on the screen here is primarily around how we're looking at trying to reorganize some of the blue badge parking areas within the site. So the option on the left sort of pushes the parking area towards the River Foss, and that creates a sort of a larger singular central green space. That does mean that actually some of the parking is actually closer towards the Eye of York space and closer towards Castle Mills and the museum rather than the Coppergate in the city. But it does mean that you can create a larger central space. The option on the right-hand side looks to push as much car parking towards the Coppergate and the city centre as possible. So really prioritising access towards the city centre. I suppose the issue with that, or the compromise with that, is that you end up with a more separated green space. So rather than having a singular sort of larger green space, you have a series of green spaces that sit around that parking arrangement. But they're just things to consider that we're still in the process of trying to design through as part of the concept. Going into a bit more detail of the sort of lawn space, I mean, one of the key things that we wanted to make sure was that whilst we're creating an area for blue badge parking, whilst we're creating an area for heritage, we are creating a usable space that is primarily green. So we're looking to put in a large area of lawn, a flexible area of lawn within the sort of centre of the scheme, and that'll be flanked with the sort of different planting designs that we want to build into the scheme, which reflect the historical narrative. There's also elements of play, so we want to feed some of that play spaces within the scheme, and we're looking to really create sort of natural play and more of a play trail around the sort of central space rather than a dedicated play space. and really just trying to reference some of the key access points, such as the castle approach, the new sort of access ways coming from the car parking, and areas of seating. So making sure that we create seating spaces that are in the right place, that have a good aspect, and you've got a good vantage point to sort of view some of the historical elements, such as Clifford's Tower or the clock tower at the debtors prison. So, I mean, given that this space is now a green space, one of the main things we want to do is use the landscaping to tell that historical narrative. And various different areas will look to do this. And I think I've already mentioned the idea of the swathe and having this sort of natural landscape that references sort of the water that once wrapped around Clifford's Tower in reference to the moat. And we are working with our engineering colleagues to see if we can create almost a sort of a bold planting design, but also a planting design that can attenuate some of the surface water which currently sits on site, so that it's got an actual purpose of attenuating water and capturing water, as well as representing water in a sort of historical reinterpretation. I mentioned about the play space, and part of the things that we'd like to do in terms of the narrative of this swathe and having this bold landscape that wraps around is that the play can react to some of that. So we want to make sure that we have a series of incidental play elements that all combine together into a larger play trail that offers quite a lot of play value, but with each of these elements being considered for all. So going back to one of our founding principles about making this a site that's designed for all and accessible for all, that we want to make sure that all of these play elements have things like sensory play or accessible for people in wheelchairs. So we're looking to design that as part of the next steps and really build that into the design. Again, sort of referencing some of the historical features within the site, the actual former entrance point to the castle was actually off from the current access point that we've got going into the Eye of York space. So there is an area of historical significance here. It is the sort of end of the gable end of the female prison where the drop is, which has some historical sensitivities. It's also the space where the castle entrance formerly once stood. So to reference this, we'd like to create a sort of garden space that people pass through that has a different character, a more reflective character, and a different character to the sort of more informal river style character that we're referencing within the sort of lawn space to the north. We could perhaps use interpretive walls or edges that reference the fact that this was once the entrance to the castle, to again give that nod that, you know, this is a historic space, it's a historic place, and it's something that, you know, if you want to scratch a little bit under the surface, you'll find, because there's elements of it throughout the landscape design. Connecting from the space that we've just looked at and connecting into the Eye of York space and connecting into the area with the Clifford's Tower is the boardwalk. And this is going to be a new connection for the city that's going to wrap around the back of the museum building and into the Castle Mills site that you sort of see at the south of that plan there, where the new bridge connection is going to go across the River Foss and into Piccadilly. So again, this will be a new connection. It'll be quite a unique space for York. It's going to be an elevated boardwalk that's going to be about 3 meters wide, so fully accessible, and will be for all intents and purposes, a connection that lets you lead yourself through some of the sort of tree planting and some of the wildlife and the sort of river edge environment that's very different to some of the other areas. So we're creating this new connection. I think it's going to be a real feature for the site that's going to connect both the Eye of York to Piccadilly to Castle Mills. The swathe, again, and talking about the act of remembrance. So we are trying to make sure that all the historic elements from the museum building and the courts to Clifford's Tower have an improved setting. And part of that is creating a new walkway around the base of the motte, around the base of Clifford's Tower. And this will tie into the entrance space for the English Heritage entrance space to Clifford's Tower that you just see at the sort of bottom of the plan here. But then also will allow us to create this new landscape that's going to wrap around and give that really dramatic sort of historical reference within the landscape design. And then so the final space is the Eye of York space. So this is it's quite a tricky area to design, because you have on one side the museum, on the other side you have the Crown Court, and they have very different sort of character and different requirements as to what the sort of external space needs to do. The Crown Court, it rightly has some very serious requirements, and we need to respect that, whereas the museum needs to act as a cultural hub, as a place that people want to visit, as a place that they want to curate. So we want to create a new garden space here, but we want to make sure that that garden space references those different adjacencies. So where you've got the Crown Court, we would have more planting to try and buffer some of the sounds that might go on from the activities that might happen in front of the museum. And in that space, we're looking to open out. So the planting sort of gets cut back, and you have a more open area, an area that's more curatable for the court, for the museum, sorry, and a space that people can obviously use and congregate within. Then to the north of this area, we have a more open space that faces back onto Clifford's Tower. And this could be an education space. It could be a speaker's corner of sorts. It's a place where people can walk to, can protest towards, can stand and gather within, and again, you know, the historical reference of that in the face of power towards Clifford's Tower is a very important thing, a very socially and culturally important thing that we want to retain. So there's three different adjacencies within here that we're trying to respond to, and the space itself is still going to be open to vehicular traffic. The Crown Court is still going to have access, but we're going to try and restrict that access as much as possible to make sure that this is, for all intents and purposes, primarily a pedestrian zone, a courtyard space with a garden in the middle. And finally, this is the last slide in terms of the concept presentation. It's really just an overarching slide to say, look, you know, the site at the moment is a car park. It's dominated by parking, and we want to create a new green space for the city, and that is a green space that is accessible for all, designed for all, and then through the landscaping we tell that historical narrative.
Thank you, Matt. So the next stage for the concept designs is public engagement. So our public engagement will launch on the 15th of August, and we're keen to receive as much feedback as possible. So we invite you to join us for the public events that are taking place in early September to share your thoughts through our social media channels or directly to the Regeneration mailbox. The deadline for receiving comments will be Friday, the 20th of September. There'll be lots more information on our My Castle Gateway website, including some updated blogs outlining the key points around the concept designs. Once we have all the feedback from the concept designs, this will allow BDP to produce the final design for the scheme, which we will be putting into planning. In terms of a broader timeline, so March to July 2024, BDP have been working on these concept designs, drawing on the previous engagement, the open brief, and the new council priorities. We've had initial discussions with some of our key stakeholders, and those conversations will continue throughout the design process. Launched in August will be the public consultation, but the main events for these will run through sort of beginning of September. We'll also be working with our consultants to review the costings for the scheme to make sure we have this information to ensure that the scheme is deliverable within the budget. Through the autumn, BDP will be using the feedback from the engagement to work up the preferred option for the detailed design. And as I mentioned, this will be due to be submitted in February 2025. Alongside the work on the planning application, we will be preparing a business case to be presented to our executive. So this will set out all the necessary decisions to allow us to proceed to the next stage once planning is approved. Within that business case, it will include the costings for the scheme, a decision to close Castle Car Park, and just to reiterate that Castle Car Park will only close once the business case is approved and the planning application has been approved as well. So thank you all for joining us and watching the video. Some really exciting, a really exciting stage in the project and some really exciting designs. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback on those. Thank you.
Thank you.